mitigates any issues that you would have with potentially overwriting data or something like that, because it's read-only, and it only contains information that you're okay with being publicly available. That's an approach that we've used at CERIAS, and I think it's worked out very well. But I don't see a lot of folks do that, and I kind of wish they would. Part of the problem is that, especially in open source circles, the most popular database server is MySQL, and only with the version 5, which has come out and been released as a production release, have views even been supported. And I think that's part of the reason why you haven't seen that, at least so much in open source circles. And then basically the last things I'm going to talk about a little bit is database access stuff, and keeping it on sort of a need-to-know basis. And that's a general principle you see all the time. But implementing it for database servers, these are sort of some specifics for that. One of the things I find that a lot of web applications don't do is, and I think that they should be doing, is setting up multiple database accounts with different access capabilities. Most web applications are either entirely read-only, or the vast majority of it is read-only. You're going to be doing selects out of the database. You're going to just be pulling data out of the database. You're not doing any manipulation of the data. You're not changing data in there. So there's really no reason why those queries, especially if that's the vast majority of the queries you're doing against the database, there's no reason that the user who's doing those queries should have any kind of write access. There's no reason that they should be able to insert, they shouldn't be able to alter tables, they shouldn't be able to create tables, they shouldn't be able to do any of that stuff. So what I would do is, if you have a situation where you have a web app that, and most of the time this is the case, that most of your stuff is going to be doing reads, and maybe you have occasional inserts for one thing or another, I would simply set up multiple database accounts. And you would have one that's very restricted, can only do reads, can only do it on certain tables. Potentially, you could do it only on certain columns, things like that. And then you just use a different user for doing writes. But you don't see that too often. Bare minimum host access. Again, the ones I'm most familiar with are MySQL and PostgreSQL, but I'm certain most of the commercial stuff can do it too, where you can restrict certain users to only come from certain hosts, and if they're coming from this host, they have only certain capabilities. There's no reason that a database should be left open so that, say, any arbitrary IP should be able to access it. If your database is hosted on the same machine as your web server, there's probably very little, there's no reason that you should have any kind of networking enabled on it at all. It can just use local sockets to connect. There's no reason that it should have TCP/IP stuff enabled on it. If you had to do administrative access, like from a desktop app or something like that, you could do an SSH tunnel and get in that way. But yeah. There's no reason to have those things turned on, and typically I see those things turned on and given way more access than there should be. And then your SQL box, if you got it as a separate box, one approach that I've taken, and it's not always going to be useful for everybody. It's not always going to be possible in every case. But that you set up a network architecture where your SQL database is only going to be accessible from your web server. And I have a fancy little diagram for that. So we have a few basic desktop machines on our local network. We have our Cray supercomputer, and then you have a web server set up, and then you just simply have a private connection over a second. The web server would probably have two Ethernet Ethernet interfaces and would be running a private connection to the DB server. So that the only way that someone's going to be able to get into the DB server and potentially compromise it is that they first have to go to the web server and compromise that. And hopefully, with all the levels that you build up, that's not going to happen. So that, especially if you have private information there, things like credit cards, username and password, private information, things like that. We've done this in the past, and it's a very effective way of keeping. It really restricts people's ability to get into that thing, and makes it a lot more secure. So that's pretty much it. I went probably kind of fast, but do people have any kind of questions about things? I'm sorry, could you hit your button so I can hear you a little better? Sorry.
What type of interesting attacks have you seen coming in?
Interesting attacks have I seen. There's a general trend. The first thing is that there's a general trend. If you look at SANS 2005 Top 20 Vulnerabilities Report, there's a general trend away from OS level attacks towards application and web app attacks. And attacks moving away from vandalism towards focused attacks that the purpose of which is to almost always retrieve private information that can be used for financial gain by criminals. That's the key thing. So you're seeing these attacks coming through things like, but coming through applications. Generally, especially on the Windows level, what you saw is that, or on the Windows level, with Microsoft has finally gotten to the point where they've done a pretty good job of locking down their OS. It is in a much better state than it was 5 years ago. And so the situation you have is that people have kind of moved away from that. Now the problem is that web applications and other kinds of applications like media players and things like that, 5 years ago, generally we didn't think that much about security. I can tell you that 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, the code that I wrote was wildly insecure. I didn't think about SQL injections, and I didn't think about things like cross-site scripting stuff and things like that. So that's a sort of a major change that you're seeing. So there's a general thing towards web application attacks. I think that you're going to. My suspicion is that you're going to see some of the kinds of stuff you've seen before, where you'll see leaks of private information coming out of particular targeted firms. Like, okay, there was some leak where, say, 20,000, user records were left out that contain social security numbers and things like that, or credit card information, things of that nature. I think you're going to see attacks against. You're going to continue to see attacks against social networking systems because those are very popular, and they are places where collected information about information about users is being collected together, and it's very easy for some kind of worm or viral kind of attack to spread because of the nature of it is that users are all linked together in a big network, and I think you're going to continue to see that. So far, the most of the attacks that you saw that were, say, on the MySpace system have been, well, no, the spyware one certainly wasn't. That was a particular that was certainly malicious. It wasn't really a proof of concept thing. But I think you're going to see more stuff like that. You're going to see them targeted at. They see a site like MySpace as a great piece where, one, the design of that web application that is MySpace is quite bad in terms of filtering input. They take